I never thought my own daughter's wedding day would be the day I finally stopped being a father and started being a witness for the prosecution of my own family's respect for me. Imagine sitting at the head table, surrounded by flowers that cost more than my first car, looking at a 3-tier cake that could feed a small village, and realizing that to the man marrying my daughter, I wasn't the man who raised her. I was just an ATM with a pulse. When my son-in-law, Mark, stood up for his toast, clinked his crystal glass, and looked me dead in the eye before calling me the walking wallet, in front of 200 guests, the room went so silent you could hear the ice melting in the drinks. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when he leaned into the microphone and whispered, "Don't worry, Dave. We've already cleared out the joint savings account you set up for Chloe's future to pay for the upgraded honeymoon suite. Thanks for being such a reliable cash cow." I felt the world tilt on its axis as the entire room erupted into awkward, pitying laughter, and my own daughter just smirked and took a sip of her champagne. I want to ask you all right now, before I even get into how we got to this point. If you had spent your entire life saving to give your child everything, only to have them rob you blind and then mock your sacrifice on the most important day of their life, what would you do? Would you sit there and take it for the sake of peace? Or would you show them exactly what happens when the wallet finally snaps shut and the bank goes permanently out of business? To understand why those 3 words felt like a serrated blade to my chest, you have to understand the last 24 years of my life. My name is David, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades working 60-hour weeks in industrial logistics. It's not a glamorous job. It's loud, it's dirty, and it's exhausting. I've spent winters in freezing warehouses and summers in sweltering shipping yards. Also, I could provide a life I never had. It paid for the private school, the dance lessons, the European summer trips, and eventually, the Ivy League tuition for my only daughter, Chloe. Her mother and I divorced when she was 10, and while it was amicable, I felt a deep, perhaps overbearing, need to make sure Chloe never felt the lack that usually comes with a split home. I became the yes dad. Not because I wanted to buy her love, but because seeing her happy was the only thing that made the overtime shifts feel worth it. Every time I felt my back aching or my knees popping, I'd look at a photo of her smiling, and I'd sign up for another double shift. I thought I was building a foundation of love, but looking back, I was just building a pedestal for someone who didn't care how much it cost me to keep her up there. When Chloe met Mark 3 years ago, I wanted to like him. He was charming, handsome, and worked in high-end consulting, which I later found out was code for living off a revolving door of credit cards while waiting for a big break. He drove a leased European car he couldn't afford and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage. But Chloe loved him. Or at least she loved the version of herself she was when she was with him. When they got engaged, Mark came to me, not to ask for my daughter's hand, but to ask for the budget. He didn't talk about his future with Chloe. He didn't talk about how he planned to protect her or build a home with her. He talked about the venue, the top-shelf liquor, the guest list he wanted to impress, and the caliber of people he needed to network with at the reception. I should have seen the red flags then, but I was blinded by the look of pure joy on Chloe's face. I agreed to cover the entire wedding. Not a contribution, not a half-split, everything. I wanted her to have the fairy tale. Even if it meant I had to live in a work boot nightmare for a few more years to pay for it. The planning process was a slow-motion train wreck of escalating costs and hidden fees. Every time we settled on a price, Mark would find a necessary upgrade that Chloe just had to have. The band wasn't good enough, so we needed a 20-piece orchestra. The standard photography package was amateur, so we needed a drone crew, a cinematic editor, and a live stream for his business associates abroad. I watched as the budget swelled from $50,000 to $80,000, then past the 6-figure mark. Chloe stayed quiet during these meetings, usually just scrolling through her phone or nodding along with whatever Mark wanted. I started feeling less like a father and more like a silent partner in a business venture that was bleeding me dry. I dipped into my retirement fund. I took out a second mortgage on the house I had worked so hard to pay off. I even sold my vintage truck, the one thing I actually enjoyed, just to cover the floral installation that Mark insisted would make the room. I told myself it was fine because it was for her. I told myself that once the wedding was over, they'd settle down and appreciate the sacrifice. On the morning of the wedding, I walked Chloe down the aisle. She looked like an angel in a custom designer gown that cost as much as a mid-sized sedan. For a fleeting moment, all the bitterness about the bills and the stress faded away. I thought, this is it, David. You did it. She's happy. But the illusion shattered the moment the ceremony ended. During the cocktail hour, I overheard Mark talking to his groomsmen by the bar. He was laughing, bragging about how he'd managed to talk me into the platinum open bar package. One of his friends asked how he was going to pay for the honeymoon, and Mark just winked and said, "The old man is a bottomless pit of cash. You just have to know which buttons to push to get the payout." My heart sank, but I stayed quiet, hoping I'd misheard. Then came the reception. Mark had been drinking heavily since the ceremony ended, and his arrogance was on full display. When it was time for the speeches, he didn't thank me for the support or for welcoming him into the family. He didn't even mention the sacrifice I'd made. Instead, he started a joke about how expensive the day was. He laughed into the microphone, his face flushed with expensive scotch, and said, "We all know who the real MVP of this wedding is. Not the bride, not the groom, but the walking wallet over there, Dave. Let's hope the leather doesn't run dry during the honeymoon, because we've got a lot of spending left to do." He laughed. His friends roared. My daughter, she didn't look shocked. She didn't look offended. She just tilted her head back and laughed right along with him. I sat there, the blood rushing to my ears, feeling the weight of every hour of overtime I'd ever worked. He didn't see a father. He saw a commodity. And Chloe, the girl I'd spent 24 years protecting, saw me as the punchline. So here I was, sitting at a table that cost $5,000 to rent, being insulted by a man who hadn't contributed a single cent to his own celebration, while my daughter cheered him on. Before I tell you how I handled the rest of that night and the gift I gave them the next morning, I want you to pause right here. Go to the comments and tell me honestly. If you were publicly humiliated and realized your own child was in on the joke after you'd bankrupted your future for them, would you stay for the cake? Or would you have burned the bridge right then and there? I need to know if I'm the crazy one for what I did next. I didn't make a scene. I've learned that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and I wanted to be strong. I waited until the toasts were over, leaned over to my sister, and whispered that I was going to the restroom. Instead, I went straight to the venue manager's office. The manager, a professional woman who had seen me writing checks for months, looked at me with a mix of pity and concern. You see, the final payment for the extras, the late-night catering, the extended open bar, and the premium floral teardown, wasn't due until the end of the night. I had a credit card on file for incidentals, and a standing agreement to settle the balance before the lights went out. I told the manager that as of 5 minutes ago, I was rescinding my authorization for any further charges. I told her that the walking wallet was officially closed for business. I even went a step further. I asked her for a printed invoice of everything paid so far, and what was still outstanding. It was a staggering amount. I then called the travel agency I'd used to book their surprise 10-day luxury stay in the Maldives. I didn't just cancel it. I asked for a full refund on the non-refundable portion by proving I was the sole payer and citing extenuating circumstances. They couldn't give me all the money back, but they could cancel the flights and the resort stay. Then, I went back out into the ballroom. The music was thumping, the lights were flashing, and Mark was in the center of the dance floor, acting like he owned the world. I found him at the bar, ordering another round of shots for his friends. I leaned in and told him I needed a word in private. We went into a side hallway, near the service entrance. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't see a son-in-law. I saw a parasite. I told him that since he clearly valued my money more than my presence or my dignity, he could find a way to pay for the rest of the night himself. He laughed, thinking I was still playing along with his joke, until I pulled out the revoked authorization form from the manager. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Then I mentioned the honeymoon. I told him that since a walking wallet doesn't have feelings, it also doesn't have a reason to buy plane tickets for someone who treats it like a doormat. I showed him the cancellation confirmation on my phone. His jaw literally dropped. He started stammering about how they needed that trip, how it was their time to decompress. I told him he could decompress at a local motel on his own dime. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. Mark panicked because he had no way to cover the five-figure incidental bill the venue was now demanding before they would allow the reception to continue. The manager actually cut the music and turned up the house lights when the payment didn't go through. Chloe came running out, her expensive veil trailing behind her, crying and screaming that I was ruining her special day over a little joke. That hurt more than anything Mark said. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't apologize for his behavior. She just accused me of being petty and selfish. She knew how hard I worked. She knew I had mortgaged my house. And yet, she stood by the man who mocked me, demanding that I just pay the bill and talk about it tomorrow. I told her I loved her, but I wouldn't be bullied into financing my own disrespect anymore. I told her that if she wanted to be a wife to a man like Mark, she could start by helping him figure out how to pay for their dinner. I left the wedding before the cake was even cut. I drove home in silence, the weight of the last 24 years finally lifting off my shoulders. The next few weeks were a barrage of angry texts from Mark's family and cold silence from Chloe. Mark tried to sue me for breach of verbal contract regarding the wedding costs. But since everything was in my name and there was no written agreement for the incidentals, his lawyer told him he didn't have a leg to stand on. They ended up having to take out a high-interest personal loan just to settle the venue bill, and the vendors who were threatening to send them to collections. My retirement still took a hit, and my relationship with my daughter is effectively non-existent right now. But for the first time in years, I feel like a man instead of a bank account. I've started traveling, small trips for me. I bought back a truck similar to the one I sold. I realized that if you let people treat you like an object, they'll only value you as long as you're useful. Once the utility is gone, so is the love. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing your child only sees you as a resource, but I'd rather be alone and respected than surrounded by family and mocked. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on whether I was too harsh, but every time I think about that smirk on Mark's face behind the microphone and Chloe's laughter, I know I made the right choice. Respect isn't something you can buy, but you can certainly stop paying for the lack of it. It's a hard lesson to learn, especially when it involves your own flesh and blood. But boundaries are the only thing that keep us from being completely consumed by people who only know how to take. I'm rebuilding my life now, one day at a time, and I'm making sure that the next time I open my wallet, it's for someone who actually knows the man behind the leather. Like this video if you think I was right to shut down the walking wallet and stand up for my dignity. Subscribe for more stories where the underdog finally finds their backbone and stops being a doormat for ungrateful people. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I ruin the wedding, or did they ruin it themselves the moment they decided my love was a commodity to be exploited? I'll see you all in the next story.